I've been playing Baldurs Gate 3 or editing Baldurs Gate 3 videos or watching Baldurs Gate 3 streams every waking minute for over a week now. Now, firstly, I may have a problem, but secondly, I've collected some mistakes that I've made and I've seen a number of other people make, so hopefully we can all get better at this fantastic game together. So let's go! Let me know any cool things that you have come across in Baldurs Gate 3 and it might appear in an upcoming video. So firstly, I want to talk about proficiencies, especially armor proficiencies and a couple of other things you need to be aware of. So generally, proficiencies aren't all built the same. And in terms of armor, what I mean by that is even if you have characters that may be proficient in medium armor or heavy armor, it's often not the best case for them to wear. The best example of this is obviously the barbarian with their unarmored defense. When you're not wearing armor, you can add your constitution modifier to your armor class, but there are several other things that you need to consider. So the main reason that you're wearing armor or should be wearing armor is because of your armor class. And what this does is that anytime a particular roll is made, that attack roll will then be compared with the character's armor class to determine whether that attack hits or not. So obviously the higher your character's armor class is, the better, because they have a higher chance of avoiding any damage coming towards them. But that isn't necessarily just increased by wearing light or heavy armor or what have you and just putting on that armor. In a lot of cases, you don't want to do that. So something to consider here is that the different types of armor. So firstly, there is clothing, which is essentially no armor. And for characters that are in this sort of category, they have the base armor class of 10 plus their dexterity modifier, whatever that is. For most of these characters, this is going to be sort of your spellcasters and that sort of a thing that will increase their armor class via other methods. That could be via the elixir of bark skin or by mage armor, what have you. Light armor is that next level up, and this will have the armor class of the stated piece on the armor plus whatever your dexterity modifier is. So any character that has a high dexterity, say for example Astarion as a rogue, or any character that uses dexterity as one of their primary modifiers, light armor is the best option, especially if you can get your dexterity up to say 20 and give yourself a +5 in that category. Medium armor is similar to light armor, except that dexterity modifier is capped at 2. So using Astarion as an example again, he shouldn't be wearing medium armor, even though maybe you have a rogue or something that is proficient in it, because their dex modifier is capped at 2. So essentially it's actually less armor class because you're not actually gaining as many benefits. Say the medium armor might initially have like a base armor class of 13 and that light armor might only have a base armor class of 12, but it's actually going to be less because the dex modifier is capped at 2. So it's worth considering that when you're looking at the armor. And the next level on top of that is heavy, which gives you no dexterity modifier for that armor. You only get whatever that armor's actual rating is. If you're wearing heavy armor, you want to increase that armor class even further. You can equip something like a shield as a way to do that. And you can also do this on characters that don't wear armor as well. If they are proficient in shields, you can whack one on because it doesn't technically count as armor and they'll just get a +2 or a +3 to their armor class depending on the shield. Now this also relates to weapon usage. A lot of classes and characters in the game will have simple or martial weapons and have access to basically all the weapons that they, are available in the game. But in some cases, there are weapons that they shouldn't be using because they're not finesse weapons. Now, what a finesse weapon is it will use either your strength or dexterity modifier when attacking with that weapon and whatever is higher. So in some cases, you may look at a weapon and it'd be like, its damage is 2 to 9 and this one's is say 2 to 7, but ultimately the one that's 2 to 7 may actually work out to be more damage because it's a finesse weapon and that character has a higher dexterity than they do strength, whereas the 2 to 9 weapon is actually a strength weapon. So also consider that when you're looking at those different weapons and your different proficiencies. The last thing I'll say about this as well is that even though some characters, say mages and everything, can actually wear armor, even if they're not proficient, you can't actually cast spells when you are wearing armor you're not proficient in, so just be mindful of. Moving on to number 2 is that your allies need work. You should be respecking them in most cases. Now, when Withers shows up at your camp, either he will just randomly show up one day or you can free him in the crypts in the first act, which I'll show where that is right here. But essentially, when you go to Withers, you can actually ask him to respec your class. Now, you don't actually have to change your class here. What we're really interested in is the last option in the menu, which is your ability points. A really good example of why you need to do this is Astarion. Now, if you don't want to build Astarion as a arcane trickster, like personally I didn't want to, he has a bunch of wasted points into intelligence. so you can actually get rid of those points and put them into something useful like dexterity or constitution that he's actually going to use. It's also worth pointing out here as well that on this screen you can actually change their skills. So say if you're using a certain 3 companions that have a little bit of skill overlap, and whether that's with yourself or even just with your other companions, you can use this menu to change their skills as well that they're proficient in, so then you don't have that initial overlap, and you're not, say, using Astarion as an example again. I love Astarion, right? Like, I'm not hating on the boy, he's great, but he has a bunch of skill proficiencies into the charisma skills, which if you're not playing as Astarion and he's not going to be your main talker, it's sort of a waste, and you can move those points to something else that maybe you don't actually have coverage of to sort of better fit your party in terms of a min-max perspective better. Also, while we're talking about withers, you can actually hire hirelings from withers as well. So when you're here, essentially you can hire a hireling of any class. If you don't want to use the companions or you want a different sort of a class in your party, you can do that as well. And the hirelings can be completely respec'd as well, so you can change their class and all of that stuff as well. Reactions are amazing, and you should be ticking the ask option for basically all of your reactions. So every combat turn you have an action, a bonus action, and a reaction. Now, the reaction system in Baldur's Gate 3 is a little bit hidden in that in some cases things will just happen. If you don't play around with this menu at all, you may just initiate an opportunity attack or something without even realizing and wasting that action, or maybe not wasting that action, because sometimes those effects can actually be useful. But in some cases, using my paladin as an example, I have a ton of different reaction options, and there's a chance that maybe I want to save my reaction for a specific action that is occurring. You'll see when looking at the reactions that they say they recharge once per turn, but there are some reactions, like say reckless attack, that don't actually recharge once per turn. It's just an effect that is triggered as long as you can actually trigger that effect. So by ticking the ask, it will tell you when it does have the option to trigger, and then you'll be able to trigger it. You can then make sure that before that reaction just actually triggers, you can make sure whether you actually want to use it or not, whether you want to react or not. This information, even just by ticking this, even if you want those reactions to go through, it actually gives you a ton of valuable information that you wouldn't get beforehand. Using Counterspell as an example, Counterspell is a reaction spell that anytime a caster casts a spell within your radius, you can counter that spell as a reaction to cancel out its effects. Now, essentially, you may not want to do this every time that this happens, but just by enabling this ask option, if you do have a spell slot and a reaction available, it will ask you if you want to counter it. So it will tell you that this character is casting this spell and it hasn't gone off yet, so you can decide whether you want to react to that or not. The same thing happens with, say, Defensive Duelist, one of the feats, that when a character makes an attack on you while you're holding a finesse weapon in your main hand and nothing in your offhand, you can choose whether to react to that to increase your armor class by 2. So in the same way, if someone makes that roll on you and say that's going to hit, like their attack roll was, say, 17, but you've only got a 15 armor class, by adding that +2, you'll get 17, the attack will miss, but maybe they rolled a 20 and you're adding that +2 won't actually do anything for you. You can sort of avoid that from actually happening. So there's plenty of reasons to tick these options. There's also a ton of gear in the game that will add reactions to your characters, like defensive snaring or something like that. So reactions, really, really important, can make such a difference, giving you valuable information for the encounter, allowing you to act while it's not your turn, which is just like a huge buff in any regards, and it's just a really valuable thing to do. Backgrounds are more important than you think. They give you experience and inspiration points. So when you're picking a background, now I've been saying this for basically all of my class guides, that you should sort of pick based on the roleplay elements, and I still stand by that, but something to consider here is that you may have noticed in the full game, which was different to the early access, is that some characters will out level others. Like some characters may level up first before others will, and this is because of the inspiration system. So when you do certain actions in the game, you may actually get an inspiration point. This will also come with some experience, but if you have 4 inspiration points, which is the maximum, that extra point will just be turned into straight XP for that character specifically. So in some cases, you may notice that some characters have slightly more XP than others. Now in the inspiration menu here, you can actually see what the backgrounds of all the characters are and what you've actually got inspiration points from. It's also worth noting that when you've got 4 inspiration points, you should definitely use up at least one of them. By any skill check that you come across, you can actually use an inspiration point to re-roll that dice, and you will get heaps of inspiration points. They come pretty thick and fast, just as you're doing, that sounds dirty, but they come pretty often when you're just doing things. So just pay attention to when you've got that 4, that you use 1 or 2 of them so you can actually get the next ones, unless you want it to go to your experience for that character. But in most cases, that inspiration point to sort of save you from a dice roll that you definitely don't want to fail is definitely worth doing. Gold is great, but what about free gold and free items? So I wanted to cover this because I've seen some questions with a lot of, you know, my friends and stuff that like they're streaming, they're like, what do we sell? Like, can you just like sell anything? And I mean, for the most part, yeah, you can sell like anything. Most of the items that are linked to any sort of story things or anything like that, they will tell you when you pick up that item. Like your character will be like, hey, I should, you know, hold on to this or whatever. So anything that doesn't happen for, you can get rid of. That's like any bottles and cans and what have you, any of the general clutter you find, gems, weapons, armor, all of that stuff that you don't want, you can sell all of that. Pro tip though, if you sell all of that and you don't get the gold cost, you can just stealth behind that character and steal them all back and then just sell them back to that vendor as long as you don't get caught. Like if you fail the sleight of hand check, obviously, you know, they will have a different attitude towards you, but essentially you can just rinse and repeat that to steal all of their gold. And you can even do this to steal some of their items as well. It's also worth noting that any of these vendors, when you go to steal from them, you'll have access to basically their entire inventory so that you can steal it. If you kill the vendor, they will have a very limited amount of the actual items that they had in their like inventory stock. However, if you knock them out via toggling on the non-lethal attacks in the passives, they will have most of that inventory. It doesn't seem like it's all of it, but it's definitely much more, especially the gold is still there. So I don't know exactly how that's calculated, but it seems to be to do with just the general economy of the game. So when you're thinking about, you know, maybe potentially just nicking a few things, don't kill them. Either knock them out or stealth behind them and steal them. And you can lock them to facing a certain direction by talking to them with a different character. But that is all I wanted to go through today. Let me know any cool things you've come across in the comments down below and any other tips and tricks that you may have. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa and I hope you have a great day.